This is video 2 of weeks 3 to 4, part 2 of principles of criminal responsibility, and we will also go on and talk a little bit about People versus Strong and the law of homicide. Where we left off, however, in the last video was talking about the two elements of culpability, mens rea in New York, known as recklessly and criminal negligence. We had ended with taking a look at negligence by itself, or mere negligence, the failure to comply with the standard of care that would have been followed by a reasonable person under the same set of circumstances. And we know that negligence or mere negligence cannot be a basis for criminal liability, but it's the building block to get to the elements of recklessly and criminal negligence. And what we need before we can find that we have either criminal negligence or recklessness is negligence plus, or excessive negligence, or extreme or gross negligence. If you look at the definitions, you'll see that idea of excessive or gross negligence is by seen in the language, the risk must be of such nature and degree that it constitutes a gross deviation from the standard of care that a reasonable person would observe. If we have gross negligence or extreme negligence, then we have either criminal negligence or we have recklessly. And the difference between the two depends upon something that we could call risk perception. If the defendant has acted with extreme negligence, let's say the defendant's extreme negligence is shooting a .22 rifle at a tin can in his backyard in North Buffalo. And then, of course, he misses the tin can, or the bullet goes through the tin can and strikes somebody who's walking along the railroad tracks behind his house, and that person is killed. Well, I think what we would say is something like this. The defendant's conduct was extremely negligent. I think we all would agree with that it was a gross deviation from the standard of care that a reasonable person would have followed. And the question then becomes this: was the defendant aware of the risk created by his conduct, or was he unaware of the risk created by his conduct? And we have to take a look at this point at the defendant. For example, before the defendant pulled the trigger, did his buddy say to him, I don't know if this is such a great idea because every so often people are walking their dogs along the railroad track? Or is it a case where the defendant, at least in the moment, was just acting like a moron, and no one brought the risk to his attention, and he, as he might say later, you know what, I just didn't even think of that. I was so intent on just doing target practice. It's a question of fact. If we find that the defendant was aware of the risk, he perceives it and disregards it, then that's recklessly. If the defendant was simply unaware of the risk, then, in other words, he failed to perceive it, it's criminal negligence. In both instances, we would have criminal liability. If you think about it, criminal negligence is a criminal negligence is a less blameworthy type of conduct than acting recklessly, because the person who acts recklessly, it seems to me, has almost hit the borderline of acting with intent. In other words, to know that there's a risk that your conduct might kill somebody and to go ahead with the conduct is very close to having, it's different, I appreciate it, but it's very close to having the conscious objective to kill someone. Now, as I have here, the final wrinkle to recklessly and criminal negligence is that if a person is unaware of the risk, but that's because of his or her intoxication, then they're held to the more blameworthy standard of acting recklessly. Now let's talk a little bit about the fact pattern in People versus Strong. And I have that case, a link to that case up for you to read. A long time ago, when I started teaching criminal law, I wanted to find a real case that was one that was off the beaten path and would really require some thinking in terms of looking at the different elements of mental culpability. So I was sort of looking for a crazy case. And along came in my research People versus Strong. The defendant, Strong, was also known by his alias Omar Ali Sharif. And the case happened in Monroe County in the city of Rochester. And the defendant, and you'll see this in the case, but just to give us a very quick summary, the defendant was the leader of a religious group. I guess if we don't like a religious group, we can call it a sect or a cult. And by the way, if you know anything about cultish behavior, there's the double down theory. So the defendant here makes some outlandish claims, and you might think, well, if he's not coming across with these outlandish claims, then how can he have any followers? Well, if a cult has been created, which is a whole different story, but if it's been created when the predictions or the behavior of the cult leader don't come true or don't happen, rather, at least initially, rather than disavowing the cult leader and disavowing the cult, the followers double down. It increases their belief in the leader. And you and I might think that's irrational, but I think being in a cult is to have irrational beliefs. And, if there's enough doubling down, the follower finds himself drinking Kool-Aid, as they say. And I suspect that was part of what might have happened here. We may have seen more recent examples of the double down theory, but I don't think this is the place to talk about it. In any event, the belief, or one of the beliefs in this religious group, is that mind can control matter, and the leader, Strong, has such great powers in this regard. What he can do, the claim is made, is put a follower into a trance. The follower's blood then stops flowing through the follower's veins. The follower's heart momentarily stops beating. And at that moment, Strong can put a knife or a hatchet into the follower's body, and nothing bad will happen because of the conditions caused by the trance. So, of course, they're at a religious meeting one night, and Strong calls forth a follower and apparently goes through the motions of putting the follower into a trance, and picks up a knife, I guess, and a hatchet, and walks. This actually happened, right? It walks towards the follower, and the follower says something like, "Please, Father, don't." And Strong then puts the knife, I think, into the follower's chest and the hatchet into the follower's hip. And hold on to your hats. The follower bleeds to death. He's dead. And so the question then becomes, what would be an appropriate form of homicide with which to charge Robert Strong, a.k.a. Omar Ali Sharif. And I've now put up on the screen the posting concerning the 4 traditional forms of homicide, the Robert Strong case. And what I've done is pick out from the New York penal law, not all of the forms of homicide, but 4 of the, I'm going to call it the traditional forms. And the most serious is murder in the 2nd degree, and that's with intent to cause death. Remember the conscious subjective. The defendant causes the death of a person or of a third person. We have manslaughter in the 1st degree, and this is intent as well, but here the intent isn't to cause death, but to cause serious physical injury. And then we have manslaughter in the 2nd degree, and here the element of mental culpability, the mens rea, is recklessly causing the death of another person. And lastly, we have criminally negligent homicide, where the defendant has killed someone and the defendant's state of mind is with criminal negligence. And then what I've done is I've taken the fact pattern of People versus Strong, and I've gone through it and illustrated how we could come up with an argument for all of the different forms of homicide. And my guess is we probably would find ourselves, let me scroll back up, looking at reckless homicide, manslaughter in the 2nd degree, or criminally negligent homicide. And I think we all probably would find ourselves agreeing that Mr. Strong, if he didn't act with intent, and I think it might be hard to establish intent here because of the outlandish nature of the fact pattern. And so if we can't find intent to kill or intent to cause serious physical injury, then we find ourselves in either reckless homicide or criminally negligent homicide. And I think we all would agree, if we're at that point, that he acted with extreme negligence, gross deviation from the standard of care a reasonable person would have followed. And then the point of analysis where we may differ is, do we conclude that he was aware of the risk and of death and disregarded it, or that he was so intoxicated perhaps with his powers that not only were his followers doubling down, but he was doubling down, and that he was unaware of the risk. And I think valid, rational arguments could be made in both directions. And you'll see that I then ended with what happened in the case itself. And you'll see that I say watched a video, and the sound quality of the video really stinks. I don't, and I'm been having problems until I got this real cheap mic for my desktop, where I do most of the work at my law office. But I'll put the video up, and if the sound quality is so bad you don't want to deal with it, then I don't blame you. You don't really need to take a look at it. But this will conclude then our presentation on weeks 3 and 4 after I put that video up. And let me just end. If you've got any questions ever about anything, feel free to send me an email, collins@ecc.edu, and I promise you it's that I will get back to you as quickly as I can, probably in less than a day. Thanks.